So good evening. Welcome to Friday night Bible study instead of Wednesday night Bible study. So I hope you are well and you're enjoying what has been a couple of really nice days in that regard. Now, for those of you who are kind of curious about our plan to reconvene our Sunday morning gatherings, we've been meeting online for quite some time, but we hope to get back into person relatively quickly. So we hope to have a full plan that we can give out probably by the end of next week. So we're not keeping you in the loop. We just want to get all of our ducks in a row before we pass that out. Also, we're going to be moving all of our online videos from YouTube to Vimeo. We kind of like the Vimeo platform better. We're very grateful that YouTube has made it in such a way that we could post stuff for free. So we'll let you know how that'll work, but you'll still be able to watch it on your phone or on your computer. You could even download the Vimeo app on your Roku devices and things like that. So we're continuing our Bible study this week, and we've decided to supplement our study of God's Word with this book by Robert J. Morgan, Red Sea Rules. And it's not that the Red Sea Rules, like, yeah, that was awesome, but the rules that we can discover from the story of the Red Sea. If you remember when Israel, they were in slavery for many, many years, and God sends a rescuer named Moses, and God rescues Israel out of Egypt. They leave their bondage and their slavery, and everything is going well, and then they find themselves stuck. And they've got Pharaoh's army chasing after them in the Red Sea in front of them, and they don't know what to do. And he's kind of brought some rules that we can learn from that story. So I don't know, did you guys enjoy chapter 1? Yeah, I really did. I was really grateful that Jack actually sent the book my way, and I got thinking about how interesting that is, how God's providence kind of works, because typically that's how it goes, right? A Christian, they just decide they're going to send a note or a letter, or they're going to just call someone because they just think they should, and all of a sudden they do something small, and yet God will take that small thing and turn it into a major blessing for someone else. So I was really grateful that Jack shared a book with me, and we were just talking in passing, and it really was a blessing to go through that. So I just want to encourage you, don't stop sharing. You never know how God can use something really small that you think is small in a very big way in someone else's life. So keep sharing comments and phone calls and letters and books and all that kind of stuff there. So hopefully the book will be a blessing to you, just like it was a blessing to me. Now, one of the things that we discover as we read through the Bible is the Bible not only... the main thing the Bible does, I guess I should word it like that, the main thing the Scriptures do is they reveal to us God and God's character, or what God is like. I mean, that's the main thing. So if you want to know what's the point of the Bible, it's to teach you what God is like. But the Bible also tells the story of humanity, right? So maybe like a secondary thing that it does. It tells about the human journey, that we're all on a journey, and the journey, we all walk a same path or a similar path, you might say. And in fact, if you pay attention to how the path works in the Scriptures, right? You kind of you got creation, and then you got this fall narrative where things just get really bad. And then you have an opportunity for salvation. And then salvation is an upward journey, but it's actually a difficult journey upward. And along that upward journey, there'll be trials and tests and all this kind of stuff, but eventually you'll find your way back to God. Or you could continue to go the downward path and not accept salvation or accept following Jesus, and just continue on your downward spiral to death and destruction there. So as we're reading through the Bible, we not only learn about God, but we learn about our journey as well. Paul will say it like this in Romans chapter 15. He says, "For whatever was written in the former days was written for our instruction, that through endurance and through the encouragement of Scriptures we might have hope." And I really, really like this. So when we read like a story of the Exodus, right, where Israel's being rescued out of Egypt and they come to the Red Sea, two major questions we ask ourselves as we read a story like that. I would encourage you, the first question you should never ask is, what does this passage mean to me? You can get there later, but don't ask that first. The first question you should ask is, what does this passage teach me about God? So when you're reading through like the book of Exodus, the first thing you ask is, okay, what does this teach me about God and God's character and about how God's salvation works? But the next question you ask is, okay, I know I've got this journey that I'm taking, and how does this story encourage me, teach me, help me, allow me to maintain my endurance on my path? And that's what Paul is saying, that these stories are written to give us hope, right? They encourage us to keep on going. Like even though if we think that we find ourselves down here and there's no place to go, have hope, because Israel found herself there as well. And if God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, He will lead us just like He led them. In fact, Paul will say this in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11. He said, "Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction." Isn't that so good? So Paul's even saying that some of those stories were written down the way that they were written to instruct us. Now the word instruction, right, you've got that word structure in there, right? It's the act of building. So when you give someone an instruction, you're teaching them how to build. So these stories, Paul will say, as we read through them in the Old Testament and the New Testament alike, they're teaching us how to build our life. Notice what Paul says next. He says, "Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands, let him take heed lest he fall." And we all know how important it is to build properly, right? I mean, Jesus will talk about this. You got to be very careful how you build your life, how you build your marriage, how you build your family, how you build your business, how you build your church. Because your building will be judged by the trials of life. That's just how it works. And a good building will be able to withstand the trials, and a faulty building will be blown over. So we might say it like that: a good church, one that's built well, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, all those things, ones that's built well, it'll be able to weather the storms that a church will just inevitably have. A family that's built well, built on a proper and sturdy foundation, it will be able to weather the storms that life will inevitably throw at that family. A marriage that is built well, built on a sturdy foundation, it will be able to weather the storms that will ultimately come. And some storms are very, very strong, and you need that. And notice what Paul, he'll go on, he'll say, no temptation. Now that word temptation can also be translated testing. So no temptation or no testing that has overtaken you, that you've experienced in your life, that is not common to man. So isn't that so good? So when we study the Scriptures, any story, whether we're studying Genesis or Exodus or whether we're reading stories of Matthew or the book of Acts, two questions. Question number one, what does it teach me about God and God's character? And then question number two, how is this helping me to build my life, to finish my walk there? And another good thing about reading the Scriptures, because Paul will say that every age, every man, right, we all suffer from the same temptations and we all essentially go through the same test because we're all in a sense walking the same journey. But what you notice is that every age, every culture, they got blind spots. So think about it like this, when you read history, you really can see this. So every age or every generation, every age is really good at seeing certain truths, but they're also bad at seeing other truths. So each age or each generation, they're kind of subject to making certain mistakes that maybe other generations and ages don't make. But they're very good at dealing with things that maybe another age group or another generation isn't. So different people from different times and different places, when we read about how they walk their journey, man, it can be super helpful for us. I got thinking about this the other day, and I really honestly think that this is why the generations, you might say, need to learn from one another, right? That every generation, in a sense, must remember its roots. So for a long time and I'm not very old, but for a long time in my adult life, long time to me, of course, I despised the little church that I grew up in. And I'd say things to myself like, it's just backward. You know what I mean? They were backward, which is ironic because I'm backward, you know what I mean? Right? And they were kind of fundamentalists, you know, which is ironic because I'm pretty conservative and, if not careful, fundamentalist as well. But I would seem to view where I came from as something negative, you know? And that was just a terrible way to think about it. Because I couldn't have gotten to where I am today without them. Like that little church, you know what I mean? I'm talking about my spiritual walk, you know what I mean? I'm talking about my family and all that kind of stuff, and they're very important as well. So I'm not dismissing them or anything like that, you know what I mean? Mom and Dad were great blessings in my life. But the little church was my first steps, you know what I mean? The foundation, right? The roots that would feed me, that nurtured me to allow to grow in my spiritual walk and my walk with Jesus to where I am now. And I got to think about it. So think about a healthy tree, how a healthy tree works, right? A healthy tree actually starts small. You know what I mean? But over time it grows and it begins to spread out. It begins to grow far and wide. But that wideness, where it gets its energy, where it gets its sustenance, where it gets its nutrients is from the roots. You know, so you can't have the branches without the trunk and the roots. So if we try to cut ourselves off from our traditions, or we try to cut ourselves off from our history, right? Or we try to cut ourselves off from those who allowed us to be where we are at, we risk losing the very power and energy and nutrition, all those things that sustain us in our journey. But the same is true in the branches. We can make the opposite mistake, right? So some of us are petrified about the next generation going out too far. So we're moving the church, you know what I mean, too forward, or the family business is going in a different direction, or whatever it is. But other people can make the mistake that we want to make sure that everything stays here. We don't want a widening. We don't want a branching out. And I got thinking about that. You know, if you cut all the branches off the tree continually, eventually the tree will die. Because the tree by default is made to grow and spread out. So we have to learn from generations that have gone before us and generations that come after us to help us pay attention to our blind spots, you might say. Now, in the modern world, and in the world that you and I live in, is actually a very, very different world than the world that, like, Moses would have lived in, you know, as we read through the book of Exodus. And one of the main differences, I would say, between our world and Moses' world is that Moses lived before the Enlightenment. Moses lived before the scientific revolution. Moses lived before the Industrial Revolution, you know what I mean, in the computer revolution. I don't know if they have a title for that there. So I always wonder what Moses or any other ancient person, for that matter, would have thought if you were able to bring them from the past and, you know, implant them into the future, like into now. I almost wonder if they would think that we were participating in magic. You know, think about it. I think about this the other day. You know, we got a phone and we kind of take these things for granted, but the phone's just got a piece of glass on the front of it, and you can turn it on, you can see someone talking to you in this piece of glass. I thought, man, what if Moses saw this thing? Like, here's this piece of glass, and we could talk to this piece of glass, and this piece of glass would talk back to us, and it was a person inside of there. What would he think? Would he think we were using some type of magic? I remember Moses, when he writes about, in Genesis, about the creation of the world, he calls the sky, he calls it the rakia, or the dome, you know what I mean? And God, he lives up there, right? The angels live up there in the rakia and the dome. You know, like, what would he think to have a flying chariot that could take people through the rakia? I mean, what would he think when we got running water? We can turn this little knob in our house and water would just come out. We had a fountain in our house. I mean, we could introduce him to people who had heart surgery, you know, and they had their valves were fixed, and they fixed them with cow valves. Yeah, I know it's not an actual cow valve that they take, but they use the cow valve to make the new valve. I mean, like, what would he think? Like, would he think that we lived in a time and we participated in magic? And I think this helps us to see one of our many blind spots that we have in the modern world. I think in the modern world, one of our blind spots is that we tend to rely on technology probably a little bit more than what we should. Now, I love technology. I love science, right? I would rather live now. I mean, I could only imagine I don't like to go to a dentist now. I mean, we got really good dentists here, you know, and they're very kind, and they do a wonderful job, but I'm petrified of dentists, man. I could only imagine what it would be like to go to a dentist in the days of Moses. I mean, that'd just be messy. So I'm so thankful that we live now. But if we're not really careful, we can tend to think that our science and our technology is an end-all and be-all, and it's that which will save us. I mean, we think about how we talk about our technology. We talk about the miracles of technology, the miracles of science. We use almost divine-like language to talk about it. And we kind of think that what ultimately will bring heaven to earth, what will create for us that utopian society will be our technology and our science. And I think if Moses were to show up, I think if any ancient person were to show up, I think they would caution us a little bit. And I think they would say, hey, be very careful, because you're almost making this thing out to be an idol. Now, what's an idol? So, yeah, idols are nice, tiny little statues. Man, this board is super nice, isn't it? I'm hoping it doesn't fall down on us. I'm excited when we can all meet back together and talk about this. So typically when we think of little idols, right, we tend to think of little tiny statues that people would bow down and worship. But the statue was, how do I want to phrase it? An idol in the Old Testament was something that you thought had power. I need to write that bigger for you guys, don't I? All right, so an idol you thought had power. So the reason you would have a little statue is the statue would take that power with you wherever you wanted to go, wherever you needed the power. So if you needed it to rain over here, you would take this little statue because that kind of had the power in it. So an idol just really means image, is all the word means, and it's a reflection. So it's a reflection of this powerful being or powerful God that it has that. So when the Bible talks about idol, what I want you to think is an idol is something that we think has power, but really doesn't. We think it has more power than it actually does. We attribute to it God-like or divine-like powers that it doesn't have. So here's a picture of what maybe a little idol in Moses' day might look like. And they were kind of these little handheld devices that you would carry around, and you would think they could do a lot more than they actually could. So maybe you thought it could make it rain, this little thing. It had the power to do that, or had the power to give you a really abundant crop that year. Or maybe it had the power, the power of fertility, so you'd be able to have lots of children. Maybe it had the power of security, so if you had this little thing with you, nothing bad would happen. And I think, now I'm not 100% sure, but I think if Moses were to visit our day and age, or any ancient person, one of the things they would say is they'd say, hey, listen, all those little technological things that you guys carry around, if you're not careful, you're going to turn them into an idol. You're going to think that they got way more power than they actually do. Now don't hear me wrong. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't have technology or science or anything like that. I'm just saying we should probably be cautious and not place our hopes and dreams in those being able to bring heaven to earth. And the way I like to think about it is like this, right? I mean, and this is not a political statement or anything like that, but Hiroshima should be a reminder of that. That our technology, we've not yet been able to bring heaven to earth through our technology, but we have been able to unleash hell on earth, right, with our technology. So it is very, very powerful, and it's done a lot of good things, but it's not our Savior, you might say. So living in a post-enlightenment or post-scientific or post-revolutionary or industrial revolutionary war, it's brought us a lot of cool things. It's brought us a lot of health. It's brought us a lot of security, right? It's brought us a lot of power. It brought us all these things. But one of the things that it's done is it's changed the way that we look at the world. So just think about it like this. We can get rid of this little guy here. In the beginning, the Bible says that God created the what? Yeah, man. You've got the heavens. Did I spell that right? Yeah, dude. The heavens and the earth. Is that right? Earth? Close enough. Heavens and earth. Okay, now, so you got land, then you've got the sky, right? So you've got that, heavens and earth. Now, we don't use the word heavens anymore. We still use the word earth. But what do we talk about now when we're talking about out there, where the stars and stuff live? Yeah, we don't use the word heavens. We use the word what? Outer space. And you say, what's the big deal? Well, let's just think about this, right? Okay, what do you know about outer space? Can you list some facts about it? Yeah, man, it's cold. We know that. It's empty, or at least it seems to be empty. Black holes everywhere, right? It's dark. And can you live there? No, it's lifeless. So in our modern way of viewing the world, we've got this little tiny ball of life, which we call Earth, and then you're surrounded by darkness, coldness, death, you know what I mean? Like, that's what you live in, is just that. Now, when you hear the word heavens, because it used to be called the heavens, the stars lived in the heavens, what do you think about when you hear the word heaven? Yeah, you think of alive. You think of, like God's work. You think of angels, busily going and, all this kind of stuff. You see this? So even the language that we use in our modern world shapes the way we think of reality. And one of the nasty side effects about living in the day and age when we do is that we tend to view the world as cold and mechanical and almost lifeless, right? So think about it. We talk about ourselves as running out of steam. We say, I can see his gears churning, right? Or we talk about the laws that govern nature, right? The way we talk about the world is that it's just almost kind of a thing that just does what it does on its own. And it's kind of like a machine that we've started and it just chugs right along. So think about it like this. Why does the earth spin and then rotate around the sun like it does? What causes it to do that over and 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 over again? Is it a machine? A lifeless, cold, giant machine that just does what it's supposed to do because of these arbitrary laws of nature? Or is it by the Word of God that everything moves? It's a good question. The Bible talks about Christ, how He upholds the universe by the word of His power. Why do the stars burn bright? Is it because they're just lifeless, balls of gas that have exploded billions of miles away? You see, this view of the universe that we currently have, right, that's kind of been handed down to us by the industrial and scientific revolution, it's helped us make a whole lot of cool stuff like phones, but it's also dulled our eyes to the reality of God's presence. Right? We just don't typically think about God being super active all the time around us. Right? I don't think when the Bible talks about Christ holding all things together, I always had a professor in school that would say the reason your nose doesn't fly off your face is because God is holding everything together. Like, we just don't view the world like that, do we? We just tend to think that things are the way they are because there's just these laws and it's just kind of like a machine that does what it's supposed to do. That God's not intimately involved in every aspect of our life. And I think the ancient people, our ancestors, people like Moses, they were more aware that God was involved in everything. To them it was God's word that caused the sun to seemingly go up, or us to go around the sun. It was God's word that called forth the rain. It was God's gift that gave you your breath. It was God who named the stars by name and put them in their proper place. And you say, well, why does this matter? Why are we talking about this? Well, because when you live in a day and age when the awareness of God's presence is probably at an all-time low, worry, anxiety become more of a problem than what they probably are. And I think, or what they maybe could be. I said that wrong. And I think that's what, in the first chapter, Robert J. Morgan, he sums it up nicely. If you remember, he says in the chapter, he says, what we need to realize is that God means for, or God has allowed us to be where we are. Remember, God's intimately involved. He's really what makes the world go round. So if that's the case, then that means that God means for or has allowed us to be where we are in this moment. And I think that's a really great point to understand. Because if we find ourselves like the Israelites, caught in between, Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea. So think about it like this, right? We can erase this here. All right, man. So what you guys been doing with all this sunshine? Planting a garden? Oh, dude, you should. All right, so if you got all these people here, right? X marks the spot. You are here. And you got giant, massive army here, right? And raging waters here, right? If the universe is a cold, lifeless machine, if this is all just fate, then this is a really, really terrible and anxious place to be. But if God means for you to be here or has allowed for you to be here where you are, then your outlook is totally different. I really like what he said on page 3 in the book. He said, some circumstances are just beyond our control. And we kind of forget that in the modern world, don't we? Because we're so used to being in control with our technology and our power and our science and our money, right? And he points out that it's the smallest things in life, like the ringing of a phone or a letter in the mail or a knock on the door or a visit to the doctor, that the smallest things can remind us about how little control we actually have. And we can fall right into a world of worry. We've all been there, haven't we? We've all had moments in our life where we're really anxious or we're worried about something. Now, it's true, some of us are probably more genetically prone to worry, because, oftentimes worry deals with hormones and the makeup of our mind and stuff like that. So there are some who probably worry more than others, but we all tend to worry a little bit, don't we? So what is worry? I liked one of the quotes that he had in the book from a guy named John R. Rice. He said, worry is putting question marks where God places periods. I thought, that's a pretty good quote. I think I might change it slightly. I would put it like this. Worry is putting question marks where God has placed an ellipsis. You know what ellipsis is, like the three little dots, dot, dot, dot. Now, I get it that that has a wide range of meaning, but what I mean is one of the ways you can use that is like a pause, that God's not yet finished, so that we think like, oh, this is the end. No, God's not finished, man. It's just the beginning. But one of the things I thought that he did a really good job pointing out in the chapter, and I think that we see in the story of the Red Sea in Exodus, is that worry really has to do with the future. Now, what we worry about is the future. And worry actually deals with the uncertainty of what lies ahead. So when Israel found themselves here, you are here, they were uncertain about what was going to happen next because their road was impeded. They couldn't go forward, they couldn't go backward, so they were worried about what the next step was. And when you and I live in a day and age, in the modern world, where God's presence and our awareness of God's presence is probably at an all-time low, this becomes even more of an issue, worry and anxiety. Right? And we've all been there. We've all been worried about what the future would hold for ourselves, for our jobs, for our children, whatever it is. So check this out. Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 6, verse 34. He says, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Today has enough trouble of its own. Dude, he's so good, isn't he? He knows what to say all the time. So I like this, because Jesus teaches us a couple things. Now, first of all, Jesus knows what it's like to be a human and to live in a fallen world. Now, Jesus wasn't fallen, but he lived in a fallen world. Right? Hebrews will tell us that he experienced every test, every temptation that you and I would experience, and he passed it. So he knows what it's like to be in a fallen world, and to be in a fallen world means that you're subject to worry. So this is why Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount, this is why the Scriptures as a whole, they're constantly talking about worry. So the question is, well, why do we worry, and why are we prone to worry? We know it has something to do with the future, but why is it something that we all experience? Well, I'm giving you my best shot at what I think this is. It's a lot of fun drawing stick figures. I don't know if you guys do this for fun at home, but it really is. Okay, so let's imagine a human being here. Yep, there you go, human being. Okay, we'll give him some eyeballs and a giant, massive brain. Okay, so all human beings, we're told, that's a good-looking dude. That's kind of like maybe an ear. Maybe he's a wrestler. He's got cauliflower ear or something. Yeah, that was good, wasn't it? I know. Lost my place. Yeah, so what it means to be human is that we're made in the image of God. And one of the things that it means to be made in the image of God is God's given us a consciousness. And another way to think about consciousness is that we're self-aware. So we're aware of time, you might say. So we're aware that there's a yesterday, and we're aware that there's a today, and that we're also aware that there will be a tomorrow. Now that's not true from what we know about the animal world. The animals really don't have any concept of time. They're not self-aware like you and I are self-aware. I think that's probably why dogs are so happy. You know? Dogs are so happy because they know they ain't never going to die. And the reason they're going to die, but they don't know it. You know what I mean? They're just happy all the time in that regard because they're always in the moment. So I read the other day that a wolf can eat up to 30 pounds of meat in one setting. It's like, what's going on? But the wolf doesn't need to save any for what? Tomorrow. Because in the wolf's mind, there is no tomorrow. So just eat now because there's no need to. But you and I are very different. We understand the possibility of there being a tomorrow. So we don't need to gorge ourselves today. We actually need to do what? Sacrifice and put a little bit back for tomorrow. Now this ability to see, you might say, into the future, right, into the tomorrow, is what enables us to do a lot of cool stuff, right? So this is what enables us to build great architectural feats. So think about it, man. You're going to build a house. There is no house there. The house will be there in the future, tomorrow. But your mind, you have a way to imagine what tomorrow could bring, and then you are able to bring that into reality. So God does this in the beginning. There's nothing, and then God imagines it, and boom, it comes into existence. Now, we're not able to do that. We have to build off something else. So I just can't magically make a house pop into existence. But I'm made in the image of God, so I reflect this ability, right, that I can see into the future and what it possibly might bring. And then I can go and bring that into reality. So same way with a family or a book or music, right? I can create a song. I can imagine what the next note is going to, if I put this note and then this note and this note and this note, what it will sound like, and I can do this. So it's a really beautiful gift that God gave to His creation. And I'm sure it worked really, really well until the fall of humanity in the Garden of Eden. Because what happened in the fall? Well, sin entered the world. And what is sin? Sin's a distortion. It's a corruption. It's a spoiling. So something that was designed to be good, our ability, in a sense, to see into the future, not to predict it, right, but to see the possibility of what might happen, has now become distorted, has now become corrupted, has now been spoiled. So instead of me seeing the possibility of all the goodness that tomorrow can bring, I now can see or imagine all the millions of ways that tomorrow may go wrong. You see that there? And if I can imagine all the millions of ways tomorrow can go wrong, now today I have to make 1,000,001 preparations to be ready for when all those possible things may actually come into existence. And when you and I live in a day and age which is no longer aware or deeply aware of God's presence in our lives, worry becomes so much more, it's amplified. Because the future is tied up with choices that we make in the present. So we know this. So the choices that I make today oftentimes affect the future. Not always, but oftentimes. So if God's not present in all of this, now the burden of tomorrow lies on me. And if the burden of tomorrow lies on me, if there's 1,000,000 different ways that tomorrow can go wrong, I have to bear the burden of being ready for all of that. And I have to choose perfectly. Because what if I choose wrong? Then the nasty reality that I've imagined in my mind will become, or the nasty thing that I've imagined tomorrow might be, will become a reality because of my wrong choice. What if there's no good choice? Now what do I do? You see, that which was designed to be a gift, I think, I could be wrong about this, because of sin, because of its distortion, is now the very thing that causes oftentimes a lot of our anxiety. And yet notice what Jesus will tell us. He says, don't worry about tomorrow. For tomorrow will worry about itself. Today has enough trouble of its own. Now, that word trouble literally means a desire to injure. How good is that, right? I mean, because we live in a broken world, and oftentimes it seems like the world wants to hurt us in big ways, right? Like everything will kill you. Like there's enough of that today. There's enough wickedness is another way to translate it, or evil. And that's such a powerful insight that Jesus gives us. He says, listen, you got to deal with enough today. You got to deal with enough today. So what's the point of bringing more trouble, which will inevitably be in the future? What's the point of bringing that in now? What's the point of front-loading that now? And that's what worry is. Worry is attempting to bring the future into the present. Okay? All the future mess now. You say, well, why do we do this? Well, we do it because we recognize that we have lack. It's one of the effects of sin. We recognize that we have lack, that there's not enough. There's not enough of me. There's not enough of money. There's not enough safety. There's just not enough. And when there's not enough, man, you got to be prepared all the time. So if I got to be prepared all the time because there's not enough, one of the things that will give me the upper hand in the game is if I can see what's coming down the pike. Because if I can see what's coming down the pike, then maybe I can be ready for it. Maybe I can be ready for it. So part of living in a world that's fallen is we all deal with this reality. And the problem is, from where we stand, from our perspective, the future hasn't happened, right? So if we even think about it like this, right? If I'm imagining what tomorrow will bring. Well, so tomorrow I got to get up, I got to do A, B, and C. A, B, and C has not yet happened. Now, I'm imagining it will happen, but it's not yet happened. So even if I'm building the house has not happened even though I'm imagining it. From our perspective, it's not yet happened. Now, Einstein, he taught us that time is a really tricky matter. And you'll get that joke later. Einstein's a tricky matter, or time is a tricky matter. But for Jesus, it's not. I kind of messed it up. See, you're not here, and I don't have the automated laugh button anymore. But for Jesus, time is not tricky. He's Lord of time. He's above time, right? He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He can. God will talk about in Isaiah. He can tell the end from the beginning, and He does in Genesis. You say, well, why does this matter? And why does Jesus tell us not to worry about tomorrow? Because what the story of Scripture tells us is that in a very real sense, Jesus has already been to our tomorrow. I mean, think about it. Think about it. What awaits all of us? Not necessarily tomorrow, at least I hope not tomorrow, but tomorrow as meaning the future. What awaits all of us in the future? Yeah, death and taxes, man. You know, Jesus did both, paid both. And death really is where all of our worries stem from. Now, we may not be scared of dying, but we may be scared of what death goes along with death. You know, like the pain, the suffering, the humiliation, the being out of control, right? The fact of leaving your burdens and your mess on your family. Like death as a whole is what causes our anxiety in the future. And this is what we worry about. How can we postpone or put off death and all of its effects? But here's what's interesting about Jesus. Jesus has been to tomorrow. He's been to your tomorrow and to my tomorrow. And by tomorrow, remember, we're talking about the future. And Jesus has died. He's went into death. What we will all experience in the future. And oh, by the way, He came back to tell us what to expect. And He came back saying what? Don't be afraid. Peace be with you. I'm going to give you some good news. Jesus went to our tomorrow, our future, and He came back and said, I'm here to tell you that everything in the end will be okay. And the trouble that you have today is the trouble that you need to attend to. I'll take care of tomorrow. You take care of what I've set in front of you today. It's a good question to ask yourself. Like, what are you putting off? What's the trouble that's in your life today that you're putting off that you need to deal with? Let Jesus take care of tomorrow. You take care of today. Notice what Paul says. He says, God is faithful, and He will not let you be tempted or tested beyond your ability. But with the temptation or test, He will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. I really like how Robert J. Morgan, how he finished the chapter. He finished the chapter with these words: the same God who led you in is the same God who will lead you out. Don't worry about tomorrow, worry about today. Not because you don't have stuff that you'll have to do tomorrow, not because you don't need to plan. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying, don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry. You take care of the trouble today. Jesus has been to your tomorrow. He'll help you take care of the trouble tomorrow. The same God who led you in to this mess is the same God who will lead you out, or allowed you to wander into this mess will lead you out. Notice what he says next. He says, so when you find yourself in a difficult place, take a deep breath. I've just recently discovered the importance of learning how to breathe properly from the ancient early church fathers. And one of the things that the early church fathers taught was they taught a breathing technique where you would breathe in for 7 counts, and you would remember that in 7 days God created the earth. You would hold your breath for 4 counts, and you would remember the story of Jesus told in the 4 Gospels. And then you would breathe out for 8 counts, because on the 8th day, Jesus was risen from the dead. So you have the story of creation and then new creation, right? And then taking deep breaths to remember that God is the God who, if He led you in, man, He's going to lead you out. So when you find yourself in a difficult place, take a deep breath and realize that the Lord has either allowed you to be here or has led you here maybe for reasons that you don't yet know. But if He led you in, He will lead you out. And take the advice from Jesus that if you're going to bring anything from tomorrow into today, bring in these words. Jesus says, today you will have tribulation. In this world you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world. So if you're going to bring anything from the future into the present, bring in those words of Jesus. Take heart, because I have overcome the world. All right, guys, I'll see you later.